From the moment I moved into the neighborhood, I knew the HOA had a reputation for being strict. The brochures had promised clean streets, well-kept lawns, and community harmony. But beneath the polished surface, there were whispers. Neighbors would quietly warn newcomers that the board was more like a dictatorship than a group of volunteers. I brushed it off, thinking that as long as I kept to myself and followed the basic rules, I would be fine. I had no idea how wrong I was. My backyard was my sanctuary. Over the years, I had poured my time, sweat, and savings into turning it into something special. A carefully designed garden wrapped around a small stone patio where flowers bloomed in every season. A wooden pergola shaded a set of benches, and a little koi pond added a peaceful sound of water trickling over stones. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't offensive. It was simply my piece of happiness in a world that often felt overwhelming. But to the HOA, it was the beginning of war. The first letter arrived in a crisp white envelope, tucked under my doormat. It bore the HOA seal in bold letters, and the phrase, "Notice of violation." My stomach tightened as I read the accusations. They claimed my backyard structures. The pergola, and even parts of my garden, had not been pre-approved by the board. They accused me of altering the community's uniform aesthetic. It was laughable, really. None of these features could even be seen from the street. My backyard was fenced off, private, and completely mine. Yet the board insisted it was in violation of the rules. I crumpled the letter and set it aside, convinced it was nothing more than a clerical error. But it didn't stop there. Within weeks, more notices followed. The fines started small, $50 then $100, but escalated quickly. They claimed each day of non-compliance added another penalty. Suddenly, I was looking at hundreds of dollars in bogus charges for enjoying my own backyard. I began to realize this wasn't about rules. It was about control. The HOA president, a sharp-tongued woman named Karen, a name as fitting as any, had made it her personal mission to dominate the neighborhood. Rumors swirled that she had targeted others before me. A neighbor who dared to park his RV in his driveway. Another who painted their front door a slightly different shade of beige. She thrived on intimidation, wielding the HOA rulebook like a weapon. Still, I refused to back down. My backyard was not just decoration. It was a reflection of years of effort and care. I wrote back to the board, demanding evidence that I was in violation. Weeks passed with no response, but the notices kept coming. One morning, I woke to find a bright orange sign staked into my front yard. Property in violation pending action. It was designed to humiliate me in front of the entire neighborhood. A scarlet letter for daring to resist their authority. The breaking point came with a letter marked Final Notice. In bold print, it declared that the HOA would be taking corrective action. Their version of corrective action was shocking. They planned to bring in contractors to demolish everything in my backyard. The pergola, the pond, even my garden beds. According to them, this was necessary to restore community standards. My blood ran cold as I read it. This wasn't just about money or fines anymore. They were threatening to physically destroy what I had built with my own hands. The place where I spent evenings with family, where I grew flowers in memory of my late wife, where I found peace. They wanted to bulldoze it all, and they thought they had the power to do it. I could have rolled over, paid the fines, and let them win. That's what they expected, but they underestimated me. If they thought they could destroy my backyard, they were about to learn just how far I was willing to go to protect it. Because this wasn't just a fight over landscaping. This was war, and in the end, I would have the final say. The week after the final notice was delivered, a tension settled over my home like a storm cloud. Every morning, I half expected to hear the roar of machinery outside, the scrape of bulldozer tracks on pavement, or the clatter of contractors unloading demolition equipment. I checked my backyard obsessively, guarding it like a fortress. My once peaceful sanctuary now felt like contested territory, and I knew the HOA wasn't bluffing. Karen, the HOA president, began parading through the neighborhood like a conqueror, preparing for battle. She made a spectacle of visiting homes, knocking on doors, and whispering about my so-called defiance. I could feel the eyes of neighbors on me when I watered the garden or sat under the pergola. Some gave sympathetic nods. Others avoided me, fearful of becoming Karen's next target. Then came the certified letter, stamped and official looking. It announced that the board had scheduled corrective enforcement within 2 weeks. They had actually hired a contractor, arranged the demolition, and budgeted the cost, which, of course, they planned to bill directly to me. My hands shook as I read the details. It was no longer a threat. It was a countdown. But here, as what Karen and her cronies didn't realize, while they were plotting to bulldoze my yard, I was quietly preparing my defense. The first thing I did was dive into the HOA's bylaws, those dense, jargon-filled documents most people never read past the first page. Buried within the legal language, I discovered something interesting. While the board had broad powers, their ability to enter a homeowner's property was tightly restricted. They could issue fines, yes. They could sue, yes. But outright demolition, only under extreme circumstances, and only with proper court approval. The HOA had no such order. That discovery lit a fire in me. Not only was I not in violation, but their threats bordered on illegal. I realized I had leverage, and more importantly, a way to fight back. I started gathering evidence. Photographs of my yard from every angle, showing it couldn't even be seen from the street. Copies of the bylaws, highlighted and tabbed. Every letter, every notice, every ridiculous fine, carefully organized in a binder. I even dug into the HOA's financial reports, which, by law, had to be disclosed to homeowners. What I found shocked me. The board had been funneling money into administrative expenses that didn't quite add up. It looked like Karen and her inner circle were using HOA funds for personal perks, catered luncheons, private landscaping, even spa trips. At the same time, I started talking to my neighbors. Some were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation. But once I shared what I'd found, their fear turned into outrage. Many had been victims of Karen's bullying, fined for trivial things, harassed over paint colors, threatened with foreclosure over late dues. My fight wasn't just about my backyard anymore. It was about standing up 2 years of unchecked abuse. By the time the demolition deadline approached, I wasn't standing alone. Primera, ade alais. Neighbors willing to testify, evidence stacked high, and a plan forming. Still, the board pressed on, blind to the fact that their arrogance had awoken something they couldn't control. The night before, the scheduled corrective action, I barely slept. I sat on the patio, staring at the pond, listening to the water trickle over stones, and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. They wanted to bulldoze my peace, but they had no idea what was waiting for them, because when they showed up with their contractors, they weren't going to find a compliant homeowner cowering inside. They were going to find resistance. And I was ready. Karen didn't waste time licking her wounds. Within days of the failed demolition, another letter arrived in my mailbox. This one stamped with the HOA's attorney's letterhead. It accused me of obstructing enforcement and inciting disruption within the community. The board now claimed I owed thousands in fines, plus legal fees. They threatened to place a lien on my property if I didn't comply. The escalation was predictable. Karen couldn't let her authority slip without clawing it back. But what she didn't realize was that her desperation was making her reckless. Each move she made exposed more of her corruption, and each threat only hardened the resolve of the neighbors she had spent years bullying. I wasn't intimidated. Instead, I doubled down. I filed formal complaints with the county, attaching copies of the HOA's letters and evidence of their harassment. I reached out to a property rights attorney who immediately saw holes in their case, and I shared every update with the neighbors who had stood with me that morning. Slowly, the narrative shifted. What Karen framed as known compliance was being seen for what it truly was: an abuse of power. Meanwhile, The whispers grew louder. Neighbors started comparing notes, pulling out old letters and fines they had received. One family had been threatened over unapproved flower pots. Another had been fined for leaving a child's bicycle in the driveway. Someone else revealed how Karen had used HOA funds to pay for elaborate landscaping in front of her own house while rejecting everyone else's improvement requests. The more stories emerged, the more the neighborhood realized. This wasn't just my battle. This was everyone's. I began to organize. Quietly, carefully. I hosted gatherings in my backyard, the very place Karen had tried to erase. Under the pergola, neighbors came together, sharing frustrations and ideas. For years, they had suffered in silence, but now there was a spark of rebellion. What if we voted Karen out? What if we audited the HOAS accounts? What if we finally took back control? Karen sensed what was happening. She started patrolling the neighborhood more aggressively, barking at residents for minor infractions. She sent out letters, warning against unauthorized assemblies. She even tried to recruit allies by promising leniency to those who supported her. But the more she pushed, the more people pushed back. Her authority was slipping through her fingers, and she knew it. The breaking point came when a neighbor named David, one of the longest-tenured homeowners, received a foreclosure notice for unpaid dues. The HOA claimed he was thousands behind, but when he produced receipts proving otherwise, the truth came out. The board had been fabricating debts to punish this. That revelation spread like wildfire. By then, I was ready. I filed for an injunction to stop the HOA from taking further action against my property. My attorney agreed to take the case, confident we had enough to not only protect my backyard but expose the entire board's misconduct. Word of the lawsuit spread, and suddenly Karen wasn't the one instilling fear. She was the one under scrutiny. The once silent neighbors found their voices. Yard signs appeared. Stop HOA abuse. Families began openly defying petty rules. Cars were parked in driveways overnight. Holiday decorations went up early, bigger and brighter than ever. It was as if the whole community decided, collectively, that they were done living under Karen's iron fist. I could see it in her eyes when she passed my house. The fury, the disbelief, the fear. For years, she had ruled unchallenged. Now, her empire was crumbling, and it had all started with one backyard she thought she could bulldoze. But I knew Karen well enough to expect she wouldn't go quietly. If Seiko didn't win with intimidation, she'd tried to win with desperation. The fight was about to hit its peak, and the final showdown was on the horizon. Karen had backed herself into a corner, and everyone knew it. The more her power slipped, the more ferociously she tried to hold on to it. She called an emergency HOA board meeting, spreading fear by claiming the integrity of the community was at stake. For years, those words had been her weapon, vague enough to sound important, sharp enough to intimidate. But now, they rang hollow. Still, she wasn't done fighting. She convinced the remaining loyalists on the board to approve a wave of lawsuits against homeowners who had openly defied her. Letters went out, threatening foreclosures, property seizures, and thousands in back dues. The neighborhood that once trembled at her paperwork now met it with outrage. People gathered in driveways, sharing the letters, laughing at the absurdity, and reassuring each other they weren't alone anymore. Karen had lost the one tool she relied on most: fear. But fear has a way of transforming into desperation, and desperation makes people dangerous. Just when I thought she couldn't sink lower, she hired a private security company to patrol the neighborhood. Trucks with flashing lights rolled through at night, their presence more intimidating than protective. The guards stopped residents for rule checks, and even tried to block my driveway one evening. It was harassment masquerading as enforcement, and it only fueled the fire against her. At the same time, my injunction hearing loomed. My attorney was gathering every shred of evidence. Letters, fines, testimonies, even photographs of the attempted demolition. Neighbors lined up to support me, eager to testify not only about my case, but about years of abuse they had endured. For the first time in a long time, Karen wouldn't be the one dictating the story. A judge would. The night before the hearing, I stood in my backyard, looking at the pergola that had sparked this war. What Karen had seen as a violation, I now saw as a symbol. It wasn't just about a backyard anymore. It was about freedom from tyranny, about ordinary families taking back their right to live in peace. That simple wooden structure had become the line in the sand. The hearing itself was chaos. Karen showed up flanked by her attorney and 2 board members, clutching binders of fabricated evidence. But every claim she made unraveled under questioning. When she accused me of building without approval, my permit documents were presented. When she claimed I refused to pay dues, my receipts contradicted her. When she insisted the HOA had authority to demolish my property, the county official testified otherwise. And then came the neighbors. One by one, they took the stand, sharing stories of harassment, false fines, and blatant misuse of HOA funds. Each testimony chipped away at Karen's credibility, painting her not as a leader but as a tyrant who had run the HOA like her personal kingdom. By the end, even the judge's patience wore thin. He not only granted my injunction, permanently protecting my backyard, but also ordered a full financial audit of the HOA. It was a devastating blow to Karen, one that left her visibly shaken as she walked out of the courtroom. Back in the neighborhood, the atmosphere shifted overnight. The fear that once lingered like a shadow was gone, replaced with determination and defiance. Neighbors began openly discussing a recall vote. Signs appeared on lawns calling for new leadership now. Karen's empire was crumbling, brick by brick, and the cracks were impossible to ignore. But Karen wasn't finished. She had lost in court, lost her grip on the neighbors, and was on the brink of losing the board itself. That kind of power doesn't slip away quietly. Deep down, I knew she was planning one final, desperate move. The kind of move that would either save her or destroy her completely. And I was ready for it. Karen's defeat in court should have been the end of it. Any reasonable person would have accepted the ruling, licked their wounds, and stepped back. But Karen had never been reasonable. She was fueled by pride, by the belief that she alone was the guardian of the neighborhood's standards. Losing wasn't an option for her, it was humiliation. Her final move came swiftly. Days after the hearing, a letter landed in every mailbox. It was dripping with her venomous style, accusing the community of betrayal and claiming that those who stood against her had doomed property values. She called for a massive special assessment fee to cover legal costs, attempting to drain homeowners of thousands of dollars each. It was her last-ditch attempt to cling to control by weaponizing money. But this time the neighborhood didn't cower. Instead, they united. Meetings were held in living rooms, driveways, even at the park. Petitions circulated. Signatures collected faster than ever before. The recall vote, once whispered about, became inevitable. On the night of the vote, the community center was packed. Neighbors who had once avoided HOA meetings out of fear now showed up in force. Karen sat at the front, arms crossed, her glare sharp enough to cut steel. She barked about rules, warned of chaos without her leadership, and even threatened lawsuits if she was removed. But the crowd wasn't swayed. The vote was taken, the ballots counted, and when the results were announced, the room erupted. Karen was out. The sound of cheers filled the hall, a wave of relief and joy crashing through the community. For the first time in years, people felt free. Free from fines slipped under their doors, from constant harassment, from the suffocating shadow of Karen's authority. Her reign of fear was over, but Karen wasn't about to exit gracefully. She stormed out, muttering threats and vowing to fight to the last breath. Yet without the HOA title, her words carried no weight. Within weeks, the audit revealed missing funds, lavish expenses, charged to HOA accounts, and financial misconduct so blatant it couldn't be ignored. Investigations followed, and soon, Karen faced consequences far beyond the neighborhood. As for me, my backyard stood untouched. The pergola, once a symbol of conflict, now became a gathering place. Neighbors came over for cookouts, kids played freely, and laughter replaced the tension that had once gripped our street. What began as a battle over one man's backyard had turned into something bigger, the liberation of an entire community. In the end, Karen's downfall wasn't because of my fight alone. It was because people who had been silenced for years finally found their voices. Together, we proved that even the strongest bully can be toppled when neighbors stand side by side. Looking out over my backyard now, I realized Karen had been right about one thing: our community did change, just not in the way she intended. It changed for the better, and as for me, I had the final say.